Good afternoon. We're back and we're in Ezekiel. And as I was starting up, I noticed something completely new. I noticed that if I wanted to, I could broadcast for 8 hours. Let's give it a shot. Just kidding. Just kidding. I don't have nearly enough material prepared today for an 8 hour episode. So let's get into our text for today. Let's begin with prayer. Blessed Lord, you have caused all the holy scriptures to be written for our learning. Grant that we may so hear them, read, mark, learn, and inwardly digest them, that by patience and the comfort of your holy word we may embrace and ever hold fast the blessed hope of everlasting life through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Okay, we've been going through the oracles against the nations. And for the most part, they've been pretty quick one and done type things where we get one, maybe two. We had one where it was a three-parter, and it's done. Now we're getting into the judgment against Egypt, and it's going to be actually a far more drawn out judgment, where the others were just like, I mean, we get maybe a chapter, give or take a bit. Egypt is getting devoted several chapters of Ezekiel. It is a very long prophecy and oracle, and it's got several different parts and subparts throughout it. And it shouldn't be a surprise to us that so much time is devoted to Egypt, because since the Exodus, Egypt has been synonymous with bondage and sin, and unrighteousness, and the worship of idols. So has Canaanite religion and all that also were drawn into it, and the various Babylonian and Assyrian religions were also drawn into it. And we get the mentions of Molech and Baal and all those kind of guys. But Egypt has always had kind of this special place as far as the prophets were concerned, and their illustrations and imagery concerning sin and its bondage. And that the bondage part, I think, is what really plays the role here, because we are bound by sin. We're enslaved by sin. And well, what was going on in Egypt? They were enslaved. And they were not only were they enslaved, but they were enslaved by a false god. And just as a quick dirty reminder, Pharaoh thought he was a god, the son of gods, and was worshipped and revered. And so to be in bondage to him was to be in bondage to a false god, which is to be in bondage to sin. And they all go together. It really comes back to what you'll hear pastors and other Bible teachers say today, that all sins ultimately boil down to a breaking of the first commandment. And the first commandment is, you shall have no other gods before me. And so Egypt actually illustrates it perfectly, with a false god as its ruler and people being in bondage to him. So it should be no surprise that when we get to Ezekiel's oracles against Egypt, that there's a lot to it. And we're going to see some imagery that's going to draw together our other parts of the Bible, and things that are going to really things that we'll be able to see, that will be able to fill in and enrich the imagery and understanding that is happening here. And so without any further ado, let's get into the actual text. Ezekiel 29 verses 1 through 5. In the 10th year, in the 10th month, on the 12th day of the month, the word of the Lord came to me. Son of man, set your face against Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and prophesy against him and against all Egypt. Speak and say, thus says the Lord God. And behold, I am against you, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, the great dragon that lies in the midst of his stream, that says, my Nile is my own, I made it for myself. I will put hooks in your jaws and make the fish of your streams stick to your scales, and I will draw you up out of the midst of your streams, with all the fish of your streams that stick to your scales. And I will cast you out into the wilderness, and you and all the fish of your streams. You shall fall on the open field and not be brought together or gathered. To the beasts of the earth and to the birds of the heavens I give you as food. So um, we begin the prophecies and the oracles against Egypt with a prophecy directed straight at Pharaoh. Again, no big surprise here, given how Pharaoh is basically the heart of Egypt as far as their their society goes, and also with the role that he plays as the human god deity thing that he is, and also the old animosities from the Exodus. Again, we're going back to that. So I mean, it's not surprising that we're going to have Pharaoh, targeted specifically. Also, it is consistent with the previous oracles in which the rulers are mentioned, and that they are a part of the prophecy. Now, in this case, it is that Pharaoh is specifically mentioned, whereas the others, they were more or less just tossed in with the other oracle, with the oracles against the kingdoms. But anyhow, um, so for us to begin with Pharaoh, it makes sense. And at the same time, we're going to see some as he's speaking against Pharaoh, he is bringing some imagery to bear that is going to really fill out our understanding of this prophecy and what's going on here. Again, remember, even as he is speaking against Pharaoh, and he is directing these prophecies towards Egypt and Pharaoh and all that kind of good stuff. These things are prophecies and things and judgments that are spoken towards everybody else, and they have a wide range of applicability, um, even though they have that narrow focus. So again, we're looking at this, and we can see a general application, and some of the imagery is going to draw that out too. So, all right. So, typical of Ezekiel, he speaks this against. He's given to this specific thing against Pharaoh to speak, and he actually gives us a time frame. In the 10th year, the 10th month, and the 12th day of the month, the word of the Lord came to me. We are going to assume that yes, this is the 10th year of the exile. So, I mean, it's the one that makes the most sense. That they've been in exile now for 10 years in that month, and that's in the 10th month of that year and the 12th day of that month. Though it could also refer to the 10th year after Jerusalem is destroyed too. But likely, I think it's a little safer for us to go with the 10th year of the exile. Yeah, either one would work. It's not going to make or break anything. I don't think that which one we go with. So, all right. So he tells us when it's going to happen. He tells us, okay, you're supposed to speak this to whom. So we get the address, typical of the Ezekiel passages, and then we get the actual prophecy, what he's supposed to say. And what he's going to say is he's going to address this to Pharaoh, and the Lord is against him. He's against Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And then he actually gets a little bit into the descriptors. I think it's interesting. We have him speaking against Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and then he goes, the great dragon that lies in the midst of his streams. Now, if you have any familiarity with the Nile, what's one of the first things that's going to come to mind about the Nile? Particularly if we get this nice little picture imagery of the great dragon. What would, and at least from our experience, be a picture of a great dragon? Uh, by the way, the Hebrew here is actually for sea serpent. Even though it's here translated as dragon, it's not the same word that is used in Genesis. And excuse me, let me clarify. It is not the same word that was used in the Septuagint to describe the serpent in Eden, which also happens to be the same Greek word in Revelation to describe the great serpent. This is actually a different word. It refers to sea creatures, sea serpents. This word does get used in the Old Testament. It does get used in Genesis to describe the sea creatures as God is creating the oceans and he's filling them up with creatures. This is the word that's used there. Even as we're getting the dragon imagery, and we're not going to set aside the dragon imagery, it is referring to something else more directly, and it's in the picture that it's drawing. But we won't set aside the whole. Wait, this sounds kind of like Satan, and we're not going to set that aside. I think that's involved here, but it's immediate. In context, and its immediate meaning is going to draw to mind something else. I hope you're thinking of crocodiles, because at least for me, when I'm thinking Nile, and I'm thinking something serpent-like. Reason I didn't say hippo, that was actually brought up on this end, is very specific. We look at the rest of the description where it's talking about scales and such. Hippos don't have scales. At least modern hippos don't, and I don't think we have any evidence from archaeology that ancient Egyptian hippos, or at least hippos during the time that Ezekiel was alive, had scales. That would be kind of a freaky creature. They're already strong and powerful and deadly to begin with. Could you imagine one with scale armor? That'd be downright terrifying. And it is, at least for those of us who have some sort of trivia to go, oh, hippo, because the hippo is considered the most dangerous animal in the Nile, in that it claims more lives than crocodiles. No, the description is of crocodile. I have scales, the teeth, and just the way that he claims the Nile as his own. The hippo does, also claims the Nile, and they're horribly territorial creatures and such. So very dangerous to be around. But no, this is very much the crocodile, and that is what Pharaoh is being compared to. But even as we're using this imagery that is speaking of the crocodile, and this is why I said we're not going to toss aside the imagery of the serpent and the dragon and Satan, is that in many ways the way he's talking about him is very much reminiscent of Satan and what he has tried to do as the adversary, and that he has tried to claim God's position as ruler, as the king of this world, even downright trying to say he created it. And we see that coming out in the thought process, the speaking of Pharaoh, the great dragon, when he goes, "The Nile is my own, and I made it for myself." That's very much what Satan himself tries to do with the claiming of God's position, and would be very fitting with what we've already seen demonstrated in Pharaoh through Exodus, and the imagery that the prophets are using elsewhere in the whole false god thing. This is drawing it all together, going, this is the accuser. Right? This is the false prince of this world, and Pharaoh is standing in for him. So even as this is directed at Pharaoh, we're also seeing the condemnation of the accuser, and from there is what is the end result of our bondage to sin, and how we are in sin subject to what is going to happen to the accuser. So Pharaoh, even he is the object of this prophecy. This is going to happen to him, and there's no doubt about it. He is standing in as a type. I think I've talked about this before in my discussions concerning prophecies, is that they make use of what we could call types, and that they're actual physical things, people, places, events, but they stand in for some. But they stand in as an example of something greater or more, and that's what we have here. Pharaoh is essentially the type for Satan, the false prince of this world. And hence part of the reason why the whole idea of the crocodiles brought into here, and the use of sea serpent. Now, to be fair, the Hebrews don't exactly have a word for crocodile, so that's not something that they would need a word for. But the idea of drawing together the serpent, the dragon, from the garden, and his temptation, and luring the people out of the garden, and his entrapping them and ensnaring them in sin, is a very fitting imagery, and we're really capitalizing on that in this prophecy. So Pharaoh is the type for Satan. He is the type for the false gods, and he's going to suffer an appropriate fate, so to speak, for that. His judgment is going to be very fitting of the crime. In fact, what we will see throughout the prophecies is very similar to how the plagues were targeted against the various gods of the Egyptian pantheon. And we're going to start with Pharaoh and his downfall, and being utterly humiliated in his downfall. And as it's a trope that's just going to repeat itself through this prophecy, where these things that the people are putting their hope in are destroyed and brought to nothing and humiliated. And it starts with Pharaoh. All right, so what's going to happen to Pharaoh? God's going to pull him out of the Nile, the place that he claims is his own, and he's going to throw him out into the wilderness. He's going to discard him like a piece of trash, basically. He's going to go into the place in that he has claimed as his own, that he sees as his rightful dominion, and that he is the boss of bosses. And God is going to go in there and just destroy him. He's going to pull him out like a fisherman, basically. He's going to put a hook into his mouth and just pull him out. Very much a similar imagery that we can draw with Jesus going into the grave. I mean, he's going into the dominion of sin, the grave, and pulling us out of it. Now, to be honest, that's a different kind of view, and that's a redemptive view. But it is, again, an assault against the false gods. And in this case, we have an assault of the false god. He's going to go, I'm going to go right into your place of power, and I'm going to make you look like a fool. That's basically what God is saying. You're going to be no better than the fish in the sea that you claim to eat and whatnot. I'm going to come in there, I'm going to hook you out and into the wilderness. And so Pharaoh's going to be humiliated as a part of his as a part of his destruction. He's not going to be able to have any reason to claim himself as an exalted being like a god. Because in the end, he's going to be nothing more than carrion, food for the beast. There's not going to be any grand tomb and a pyramid for Pharaoh. There's going to be a rotting carcass in the wilderness, feasted upon the birds and the animals, birds and the beasts, excuse me. And along with him are going to be drawn all of the, he's going to make the fish of your stream stick to your scales. Again, this is very much reminiscent of what we will see with the in Revelation with the kicking of Satan out of the heavens and the sweeping of the falling stars, and them being cast into the abyss. And so this is one of the reasons I'm looking at this and going, oh, we can't toss aside that reference towards Satan, is because it's very much similar to that imagery we get in Revelation. And on top of that, the whole Garden of Eden thing. And so all of those who are bound to Pharaoh, all of those who are bound in their worship to this false god, are also going to be tossed out into the wilderness. And so this could also, yes, because of its broad implications, apply to the people of Israel, particularly the exiles of the time, because they had faith in Egypt. They thought Egypt was going to defend them. They made a deal with the devil, basically, to save their hides. And, well, a part of judgment is, well, you get what's coming to him, get what's coming to Satan, too. And so his hangers-on are going to be just bound to his skin, and they're going to go out into the wilderness with him, and they're also going to be reduced to nothing more than the carrion for the beast and the birds of the air. And in that, we see within this context now, we also can say, yes, this does apply to more than just Pharaoh. And that was going to be the truth as we progress anyways, but we can see even as he's talking to Pharaoh, he's talking to other people. God makes it a little bit easier for us to see that with this. And so that is what's going to be happening. And this is setting the tone for the rest of the oracles against Egypt. Unfortunately, because of how my schedule is worked out today and some of the things that have happened today, I didn't get much further than this, so we're going to be ending a little bit earlier. But realize this is setting the tone for what is to come. And we're going to see some more exposition on how this is going to happen. And it's going to culminate with Pharaoh's fall to Babylon. So, and on that note, we're going to end here, and we'll be back next week, picking up with the rest of, well, not the rest of the oracles, but continuing at least with the oracles in Egypt, and moving on and seeing how that does have that general applicability. Man, my tongue is getting tied today. To the rest of us. And with that, blessings, have a great week, and we'll see you again, same bat channel, same bat time, and we'll be right here, and I promise Ben Affleck is not Batman. See you later.